Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start now. Could you take your seats, please? Thank you very much. Take your seats, please. I know there's a lot going on. You have a lot of choices in terms of side events this morning, so thank you so much for coming to hear some of what we have to say with respect to the landlocked countries and the challenges that they're facing regarding energy, climate change, and water. I do want to recognize on the podium the Deputy Foreign Minister of Tajikistan, Mr. Mufazzar Hussein Zoda, and to his right with him we also have the head of IRENA, Mr. Francesco La Camera. He's the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. We're going to hear from these gentlemen and some others in terms of sharing their experiences of landlocked countries. I also want to recognize His Excellency Mr. Mangaliso Ndlovu, who is the Minister of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry of Zimbabwe. We have online Mr. Liu Zhenmin, who is the UN Under-Secretary General for the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, that's UN-DESA. And we also have online a friend and colleague of mine, Ms. Mami Mizutori, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. So let me just extend a warm welcome to you all at this side event. The title of this side event is Enhancing Capacity of Landlocked Developing Countries to Address Climate Change, Energy, and Water-Related Challenges during the COVID-19 era. Simply put, they're sharing their experiences and putting forward some possible solutions. I should say to you that this event is being jointly organized by my office, the UN Office of the High Representative of Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developed Countries, and Small Island Developing States. And co-organizer is the government of Tajikistan, as well as UN-DESA and IRENA. I should introduce myself. I am Courtney Rattray of the OHRLLS, and I will be moderating this event today. Our aim at this event is really to discuss the impact of climate change on LDCs. We also aim to identify the specific challenges that are faced by these countries and to reflect on how COVID-19 has been impacting the situation that they face. And I really want to highlight the effective solutions. We're trying to have a solutions-oriented meeting that gives practical recommendations on how to better support these countries, the landlocked developing countries. I think this is particularly important, especially as we look ahead to the UN SDG Decade of Action and our ambition to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals. So to address these issues, as I said, we have a distinguished list of speakers that include Mr. Liu Zhenmin, the Under-Secretary General, as I said, Mr. Mufazzar Hussein Zoda, the Deputy Foreign Minister, and Mr. Le Camera. So what I will do now is to begin. I know Mr. Liu has been online waiting for some time. I'm going to, as a co-organizer, I'm going to ask Mr. Liu if he could deliver his remarks right now. Mr. Liu Zhenmin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Courtney. Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by asking for indulgence for not being able to join you in person at this COP26 due to my many of engagement at the current UN General Assembly. But I'm pleased to join you this side event, Enhancing Capacity of Landlocked Developing Countries. Its focus on climate change, energy, and water-related challenges amid the COVID-19 pandemic is the most timely. The pandemic pushed about 120 million people into extreme poverty in 2020. It reveals the past development economic gains, with the poor and the disadvantaged groups bearing the greatest brunt. And it closed the gaps in access to clean water distribution and electricity supply. In landlocked developing countries, over half of the total land is dry land. Agriculture is a major sector providing employment, around 44% on average. Landlocked developing countries have to bear the high cost of cross-border energy trade and energy transit. Due to all these challenges, water, food, energy security is becoming critical for their existence. Indeed, water is essential for energy production, electricity, and hydropower generation. And water use efficiency depends on efficient food production. In arid regions, glaciers and snow cover are precious water sources. Yet, as climate change marches on, they are quickly disappearing, impacting water supply and management, food production, and energy consumption. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the Water Action Decade 2018 to 2028 is aimed at addressing these critical challenges. Its aim to achieve sustainable development and integrated management of water resources is intended to promote efficient water usage at all levels. This also means taking into account the water, food, energy, and environment nexus. Significantly, the United Nations will convene in 2023, the 2023 Water Conference, to review the first half of the decade, as well as water-related SDGs. This conference, to take place in New York in March 2023, will be the first UN conference solely dedicated to water for nearly a half century, after the Mar-del-Plata Water Conference in 1977. All member states and relevant stakeholders, especially those in vulnerable countries, are encouraged to fully utilize this opportunity. Landlocked developing countries need global support of financial and technological assistance and capacity development. Such support is essential for developing countries to tackle their geographical challenges and help deliver the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. I thank you for your attention and my best wishes for the success of this important side event. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liu, for those remarks. Next, we will have His Excellency Muzaffar Hussain Zoda. As I said, he's the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan. Mr. Hussain Zoda, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished audience, distinguished Under-Secretary General Mr. Dray, distinguished Under-Secretary General Mr. Liu Zhenmin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank the UN-DESA and the UN-OHRLLS for co-organizing of our high-level side event aimed at strengthening capacities in addressing climate change, energy and water access, and other challenges during the COVID-19 era from the perspective of the landlocked developing countries. I'm confident that today we will share our views and discuss specific impact of climate change on LLDCs and identify our priority needs that should be addressed to ensure LLDCs stable and significant progress with focus on water-related issues, food security, energy connectivity, and other challenges including the global pandemic. Dear participants, the COVID-19 pandemic has upended countless lives around the world, and it will definitely hamper and delay achieving SDGs, particularly in LLDCs, and Tajikistan, as one of the landlocked developing countries, is no exception. One of the most important interventions by the government of Tajikistan during the outbreak of COVID-19 was the rapid scaling up and strengthening the national laboratory capacity for COVID-19 testing. My government established a national multi-sectorial COVID-19 task force chaired by the Prime Minister and approved the country preparedness and response plan for COVID-19 and risk communication and community engaged plan, which we prepared very kindly with the assistance of the UN entities in Tajikistan. The United Nations has called for a COVID-19 socio-economic response that is underpinned by building back better and leaving no one behind. Guiding by these principles, Tajikistan, as the LLDC, commends the efforts made by the United Nations for the need of global solidarity to overcome this challenge, avoiding vaccine nationalism and providing vaccine for all. Another challenging issue is climate change. That is also a serious obstacle to achieving the sustainable development goals in various LLDCs, including Tajikistan. My country, with 93% of its territory covered by mountains, is very much concerned, along with other countries in the region, about changes in the hydrological cycle leading to severe floods and droughts and causing a negative impact on water, energy, and food security. Unfortunately, our country loses hundreds of millions of dollars annually as a result of waterborne disasters, and in many cases, natural disasters cause human losses and destruct the vital infrastructure. Distinguished colleagues, one of the serious impacts of the climate change is the melting of the glaciers, which is the main source of drinking water in Central Asian region. As a result of climate change and unprecedented warming, more than 1,000 of the 13,000 glaciers of Tajikistan have completely melted. According to the available statistics, the Fetchenko Glacier in my country alone has shrunk to 1,000 square meters in recent decades and lost 16 cubic kilometers of ice. This all is happening despite the fact that up to 60% of all circulation water resources originate from Tajikistan glaciers. Our country ranks 135 in the world in terms of carbon dioxide emissions and produces 96% of its electricity in hydropower plants. The President of Tajikistan, His Excellency Mr. Imam Ali Rahman, has made concrete proposals at international conferences on several occasions to find solutions to the problems associated with climate change and water issues. In this regard, as a member of the founding group of the World Water and Climate Coalition, the President of Tajikistan proposed at the first high-level meeting to declare the year of 2025 as the International Year for Preservation Glaciers. We firmly believe that this initiative will help to attract more attention of the world community to the water and climate issues and the melting of glaciers globally, particularly in the LLDCs. The establishment of the International Fund for Glacier Preservation under the auspices of the United Nations is another step that could provide a basis for comprehensive research and effective solutions to this global problem. Dear friends, Tajikistan is recognized as an initiator and a lead country and contributes to the process of promoting water and climate issues in the global development agenda and submitting relevant UN resolutions on these issues. The International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development 2018 and 2028, initiated by Tajikistan and declared by the United Nations, is under implementation currently. The international community is looking forward to the United Nations Conference on the Comprehensive Midterm Review of this decade to be held in New York in 2023. Because in almost 50 years, it will be the second special conference of the United Nations on water, which will once again prove the key role of water issues in the global development agenda and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're proud that Tajikistan, together with the Kingdom of the Netherlands, are elected to co-chair of this important international forum. In this regard, we have already begun preparations with our partners, including the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, and are taking steps to organize a comprehensive and high-level conference. We would like to encourage all stakeholders to cooperate extensively in this process. Let me recall that in June 2022, our country will host the International High-Level Conference on the review of the International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development. We believe that this forum will play an important role in the preparations for the 2023 Water Conference. Taking this opportunity, I reaffirm my country's readiness as part of the LLDCs to advance water and climate issues at all levels, especially in cooperation with the United Nations. And I thank you for your attention.
Let me thank Deputy Foreign Minister Hussein Zoda for those remarks and call on the Director General of IRENA, Francesco La Camera, to deliver his remarks. Please.
So thank you, and it's my great pleasure to participate in this event. And let me extend my gratitude to the co-organizer, so the Office of the High Representative, UN-DESA, and the government of Tajikistan, all whom are also close partners of IRENA. And the topic we are discussing today is aptly linking several inseparable issues. If we never needed a further reminder of the deep-rooted vulnerability of many nations and inequalities across the economy and geographies, COVID-19 pandemic has shown this with a great intensity. And we see that overcoming the challenges must start with some essential prerequisites. This is why the Vienna Programme of Action for the Landlocked Developing Country clearly puts energy as one of its fundamental priorities. Without energy, access to water, health services, and information is hampered. Unreliable and outdated energy systems cannot drive prosperity of economies and communities. And air pollution and climate change concern shift focus toward modern and clean energy sources. It is essential to make the right choices as we look beyond the health crisis. Unlike any others, the renewable energy sector has shown a remarkable resilience in the past 2 years. The cost of solar and wind power continue to decline, with new solar and wind projects increasingly undercutting even the cheapest and the least sustainable existing coal-fired power plants. And the number of jobs in the sector increased by 500,000 in the last year to 12 million worldwide. But this positive trend is yet to be realized in the LLDCs. This country has a great potential to produce renewable energy ranging from hydropower to solar, wind, bioenergy, and geothermal sources. Still, 58% of people in these nations live without energy access. This is simply not acceptable, especially when we have the solution at hand. Enabling access to renewable energy will ensure clean water, adequate nutrition, job creation, and education, among others. It will open avenues for industrial development and resilience of the system in the face of climate change. Support LDCs through technical advice and capacity building for renewables is IRENA's priority. We are pleased to be working with the Office of the High Representative on a joint report on scaling up renewables energy in the LLDCs. The report will include recommendations and action on how to build a renewable-based and resilient energy system, close the energy access gap, and harness the socio-economic and environmental benefit of renewable energy. We are also providing direct support to country, and the past year has been dedicated to enhancing renewable energy ambition in the NDCs. We have worked with 70 countries, including Mali, Niger, Uganda, Botswana, Sudan, Azerbaijan, Bhutan, Paraguay, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. We aim to provide very practical support based on our extensive expertise. For instance, we deploy the Renewable Readiness Assessment, the RRA, in coordination with governments to help understand how to improve the conditions for renewables deployment. At the moment, RRA implementation is ongoing for Burkina Faso and Kyrgyzstan, with a recent RRA being completed for Botswana and Paraguay. Another example, especially relevant for our discussion today, is IRENA's technical support to advance the deployment of renewables to health facilities. We are now working in collaboration with WHO, with Burkina Faso, on an assessment for the electrification of rural health facilities, and we will expand this program in several other countries. Let me briefly reflect on investment, including the private sector investment, which is a major barrier for the LDCs. We have shifted our institutional focus toward this area and have created the Climate Investment Platform with our colleague from UNDP, C4All, and GCF. We are already seeing a great interest in CIP, and we have made progress in creating a pipeline of projects. As soon as the conditions allow, we will organize investment forum in all regions to support matchmaking and make this pipeline a reality. Moreover, just yesterday, together with the government of the UAE, our host country, the host country of IRENA, we launched the Energy Transition Accelerator Facility, a fund that will mobilize $1 million capital to developing countries to accelerate the scale of renewable energy deployment to meet the climate and investment priorities and development priorities. The UAE generously pledged $400 million already and will be operationalizing this facility in the coming month. Let me conclude by saying that you can fully count on IRENA support through our vast repository of analysis, data, and products, and our collaborative effort with all our members to ensure the energy transition in LLDCs is achievable, is sustainable, and is just. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the Director General of IRENA for bringing us that message and including some of the really interesting initiatives that he's doing with the United Arab Emirates and also with the establishment of the Climate Investment Platform. We look forward to those being materialized. I do now want to turn to our next speaker, who is already on the stage, His Excellency Mangaliso Ndlovu, who is the Minister of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry of Zimbabwe. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you, Program Director, Your Excellency, Mr. Ratai, Under Secretary General and High Representative of the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is very clear that the effects of the climate change are disproportionately borne by those who least contributed to it, the developing countries, particularly the African countries, as well as the landlocked countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is far worse for landlocked developing countries like Zimbabwe. I want to thank the organizers for this very important event, for providing a platform for us to focus on these vulnerable countries, with the hope that our peculiar circumstances will drive us towards shared solutions to both the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate change crisis. Zimbabwe has in the last 3 decades experienced increases in temperatures, extreme weather events, and changes in the weather patterns. The frequency and magnitude of droughts, floods, heat waves, and erratic rainfall patterns has noticeably increased. The tropical cyclone Idai is still fresh in our minds, affecting an estimated 270,000 people in Zimbabwe, more than 340 lives lost, and many others still missing. We had villages that were completely buried. A significant number of surviving households lost everything, including shelter. Agriculture, schools, and health facilities all suffered heavy impacts. Roads and bridges were severely damaged, and some 1,500 kilometers of the road network was rendered unusable for months, affecting market access. This story, ladies and gentlemen, is not unique to Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Malawi, but one that humanity is increasingly confronting, and this will intensify if the rhetoric that we have been hearing from world leaders at this COP26 and in many other platforms is not translated to urgent action. The agricultural sector in Zimbabwe provides a major source of livelihood for over 70% of the country's population, and the sector is largely rainfall dependent. The high temperatures and precipitation irregularities caused by climate change are causing arid environmental and increased water scarcity that makes it difficult for predictable agriculture. Livestock production hasn't been spared either, from declining pasture yields to increased pests and disease incidences, all influenced by climate change. Climate change impacts heavily on food security for smallholder farmers whose operations are not covered by irrigation schemes. Where communities used to easily access water through shallow wells, they now need to dig deeper to tap up the water. Increased water scarcity is seen in depreciating groundwater levels as the water tables are becoming deeper and deeper. This, ladies and gentlemen, is clear evidence that the groundwater is getting depleted owing to a drier climate. Increasing water scarcity is also affecting the productive sectors of the economy, such as mining, energy, agriculture, and tourism. Hydropower contributes a significant proportion to our country's electricity generation, contributing an estimated 50% of the energy mix at its peak, with the potential to increase to 70%. Recurrent droughts have led to the decrease in water levels of major water reservoirs, including Lake Kariba, which affects electricity generation with subsequent impact on other sectors. The COVID-19 pandemic has added to the impact of climate change by presenting additional costs to the economy. Global logistics were disrupted at unprecedented levels, and for countries without access to the seas like ours, we were at the mercy of lockdowns and travel restrictions from neighboring countries. Again, this is not a story unique to Zimbabwe, but to all other landlocked countries. Distinguished guests, I'm not here to just mourn and highlight the desperate situations landlocked countries face, but to demonstrate that there are solutions if we all worked together. Zimbabwe has made efforts to adapt and mitigate the impact of climate change, and I'll highlight just a few of the solutions that we are implementing. We have developed supportive policies and strategies that include the National Climate Policy, the National Climate Change Response Strategy, the National Renewable Energy Policy, the National Agriculture Policy Framework of 2018, and the National Biofuels Policy. And in addition, the country has communicated its revised, ambitious, national determined contributions to the UNFCCC, together with the Low Emission Development Strategy. The revised NDCs commits to a 40% economy-wide per capita greenhouse gas emissions reduction target by 2030, and this includes an adaptation component. As I speak, the country has made significant progress in its national adaptation planning process. Among the priorities in the national adaptation planning process and the revised NDC's adaptation component are early warning and disaster risk reduction, climate smart agriculture, climate resilient infrastructure development, and resilient and sustainable water resource development. Furthermore, Zimbabwe is finalizing the development of its water resource master plan to guide water resource development and management. The process incorporated future climate scenario projections to guide water resource development and management. In November 2020, Zimbabwe launched the National Development Strategy 1, which charts policies, institutional reforms, and national priorities needed from 2021 to 2025. And climate action is at the heart of the plan, which is addressed in most of our sectors. Climate change solutions that Zimbabwe is promoting for scaling up and replication include climate smart agriculture, the training of smallholder farmers, improved management of wetlands, as well as in the energy sector where we are promoting ethanol blending, solar water heaters, energy efficiency improvements, increased use of hydropower generation, among others. And let me just highlight as I conclude some of the areas where Zimbabwe requires enhanced capacity to be able to promote climate action and post-pandemic recovery. Zimbabwe requires increased access to adequate financial support to implement our adaptation and mitigation strategies to achieve the goals set out in our revised NDCs. We need to be able to scale up solutions that are working, and we need to create green jobs and enhance the contribution of renewable energies in our energy mix. Distinguished colleagues, we urgently require predictable, adequate and accessible resources from the international community. I hope that developed countries will be able to deliver on the long-awaited promise to raise at least $100 billion every year in climate finance to support developing countries' transition to low carbon and climate resilient development pathways. We also require affordable and better technologies to strengthen adaptation in agriculture and water sectors, to build resilient infrastructure, in particular the roads, and to accelerate the energy transition. We also need capacity building, for example, towards identifying and preparing bankable projects to secure financial resources for climate change, adaptation and mitigation needs, and national capacities to monitor progress that we are making on climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, I have heard astronomical figures pledged to support adaptation by the developed countries. I just presented practical projects that can significantly impact communities and accelerate mitigation efforts. I look forward to a similar platform in COP27, where LLDCs will be articulating how they have benefited from these pledges. In conclusion, I wish to assure you, Under-Secretary General of Zimbabwe's commitment to implement the Vienna Programme of Action for Landlocked Developing Countries and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
Let me thank Minister Mangolisa Unlovu for those excellent remarks. As he said, he's not just here to moan and groan and to talk about the challenges, which are not insurmountable. They're immense, but they can be overcome. There are solutions that are out there. And you heard what he said, that Zimbabwe already has a national climate change response strategy. They have a very ambitious revised NDCs, and they're undertaking climate smart action that will affect their agriculture industry, their energy industry, and benefit through resilience their small farm holders. So I think a lot is done, but you heard what he says. There is a need for financing, and not just for financing, but adequate financing for adaptation. He needs predictable financing and accessible financing. It's a very powerful message that I think has resonated certainly with me and hopefully with a lot of you. You know, we have a couple more speakers, but I'm going to ask you to indulge me because I have some of my own remarks to make, which I will use the prerogative of the moderator to do that at this time, and then we will go back to the other speakers on our list. As you may know, ladies and gentlemen, these 32 countries, the landlocked developing countries, are characterized by certain structural difficulties, let's say. They are very remote from world markets. They have cumbersome transit procedures, and they operate with multiple risks that result in very high cost of doing business, that is trading costs. And this leads, I think, to limited export earnings, constrained private capital inflows, and a restricted ability to mobilize domestic resources. So these structural vulnerabilities and limited productive capacities of landlocked developing countries expose them disproportionately to the impact of climate change. And these impacts, I should say, are not getting any better. They are worsening as these countries are confronted with more extreme weather events such as storms, cyclones, and floodings. Added to this is an increased frequency of heat waves that are getting hotter and indeed that are lasting longer. And disturbed rainfall patterns are causing prolonged droughts, more intense rainfall, floods, and disrupted water supply. You know, over half of these countries, over half of the LLDCs, land is categorized as dry land, and 60% of their populations are located in these areas. And what does this mean? This means that huge numbers of people are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Wildfires are now more common than ever before, as seen in the extreme heat waves that took place in 2019 in Southern Africa, and also in the LLDCs that exist, that are located in Latin America. At the same time, the mountainous regions of countries like Bhutan, Nepal, we have the Deputy Foreign Minister from Tajikistan here, mountainous regions like Tajikistan, and in Latin America you have countries like Bolivia. You have rising temperatures that are melting glaciers, and this results in much more landslides, flash floods, and reduced water availability. I think you heard the Deputy Foreign Minister from Tajikistan say earlier that there are 1,000 of Tajikistan's 13,000 glaciers have completely melted. Bear in mind that these glaciers account for over 60% of the water resources of Central Asia. So over the long term, threats from this melting include stressed water supplies, which impact agricultural, irrigation, fisheries, and navigation. The meltwater that glacial lakes have left behind risk collapsing in sudden and catastrophic glacial lake floods. The overdependence of LLDCs on climate-sensitive resources such as agriculture, livestock, forestry, water, and fisheries make them increasingly vulnerable. Increased desertification and recurrent droughts in the Sahel region in southern Africa have affected agriculture and water security, and they have had detrimental effects on food security, livelihoods, and on the economies of these countries. The increasing frequency of extreme climate events is compounding those structural weaknesses that I mentioned earlier. The human cost is growing, and the burden on national infrastructure projects is increasing. Just look at the impact of Tropical Cyclone Idai in 2019, which struck Mozambique, Malawi, and you heard from the minister from Zimbabwe, it had a huge impact on his country with devastating consequences. And that same year, 2019, in South Sudan, Heavy rain submerged whole communities that were already facing a humanitarian crisis. Flooding in LLDCs and transit countries is another element of the climate catastrophe that is compounding the existing weaknesses. When transport infrastructure is impacted, transit trade is slowed down, or even it comes to a complete stop, putting further constraints on the ability of these countries to compete on the global market. I am sure that many of you have seen the IPCC report that confirms that climate change is running faster than we are, and that we are running out of time. With continued failures at the global level to meet the promises of Paris, the latest data tells us that we are heading for 2.7 degrees temperature rise, not 1.5. For landlocked developing countries, that difference between 2.7 and 1.5, that 1.2 degree difference, is like the difference between night and day. It is vital, therefore, that we act now by investing in adaptation, mitigation, and eventually reversing the effects of climate change. The LLDCs have very limited institutional human capacity or financial resources, as you have heard, to tackle these challenges that arise from climate change. And the COVID pandemic has increased their vulnerability to the impact of disasters and reduced their climate change adaptation capacity. However, we're going to focus on solutions, and there are solutions in sustainable water conservation, for example, land restoration, and sustainable climate-smart agriculture. Climate-resilient infrastructure is another solution, as is renewable energy solutions and strengthened early warning systems. So I'm going to turn it over to somebody who can talk to you a little bit about strengthening early warning systems. It's my friend and colleague, the Assistant Secretary General and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. It's a pleasure now to give the floor to Ms. Mami Mizutori, who is joining us online.
Thank you very much, Courtney. We have heard so forcefully from our dear colleagues from the landlocked developing countries on their challenges. And we have heard from you, Courtney, that we need to focus on solutions. And let us do that. But first, I would like to begin by thanking the co-organizers of UN-OHRLLS, the government of Tajikistan, and UN-DESA for inviting the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction to this event. We believe it's very important to be with you today because of all the disasters that you are experiencing. But again, the message that we need to be more preventative. As we have heard, LLDCs, climate and disaster risks that surround them far exceed the capacity to respond to and recover from disasters, and consequently being left behind in the implementation of the Sendai Framework, the Vienna Program of Action, and ultimately in the implementation of the SDGs. The environmental, social, and economic impact of extreme and slow onset events underscore that landlocked developing countries urgently need to take risk-informed approaches to poverty reduction, economic growth, and sustainable development. And there is a strong willingness to do this, but there are challenges. LLDCs face specific challenges, which requires a transboundary approach to risk governance, including cross-border cooperation on disaster-resilient infrastructure and trade with transit countries. And I'm delighted that in terms of the disaster-resilient infrastructure, already 4 landlocked developing countries, namely Afghanistan, Bhutan, Mongolia, and Nepal, have become members of the Coalition for Disaster-Resilient Infrastructure, co-led by the governments of India and UK, and UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction as a founding member. And I would like to invite more landlocked developing countries to join this coalition that will, once again, provide solutions to your infrastructure issues. And it is also the point I would like to make that the political declaration of the midterm review of the Vienna Program for Action, in that member states have recognized resilience risk reduction as a priority and established synergies between the program of action and the Sendai framework, which is why it is very important for our organization to be with you in providing solutions. And I would like to say that the year 2023 is very important for the landlocked developing countries. Why? Because the midterm review of the Sendai framework will culminate. We will look at the challenges and we will enhance our political will to move forward. So will, in the same year, the process to develop a successor to the Vienna Program of Action will happen, and the global stock taking of the Paris Agreement. These are very important opportunities which will strengthen synergies and identify priority actions for landlocked developing countries and transit countries to reduce risk and build resilience. Let me just mention two things that we are doing concretely on the ground in order to support LLDCs in tackling climate and disaster risks and building resilience. One, we are taking forward what is called the Comprehensive Climate and Disaster Risk Management Program, which is a program to support countries with special needs, including, of course, LLDCs, so that you can take a systemic approach towards both disaster and climate risk management, integrating them, bringing them together so that they will allow to make your policies risk-informed. The other initiative we are taking forward now is what is called the Global Risk Assessment Framework. This is an initiative to support vulnerable countries to combine your climate data and also other data around elements of risk, including the vulnerability data, the exposure data, and this again will inform your development and humanitarian planning. Most recently, in order to mobilize partnerships and advance joint efforts, UNDRR and WMO, we have jointly launched a Center of Excellence for Climate and Disaster Resilience in Geneva. This center will promote a comprehensive understanding of risk across multiple countries, including the LLDCs. So let me conclude by calling for 3 actions to increase support for integrated disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation for the landlocked developing countries. First, we need to dramatically raise ambition for reducing and managing risks due to climate change, which requires a 50-50 share between adaptation and mitigation in the 100 billion annual climate finance. Second, we need to significantly increase support for averting, minimizing, and addressing losses and damages with the full spectrum of risk addressed, including risks from both extreme and slow onset events triggered by climate change, as well as all other hazards. And third, finally, we need to accelerate predictable and risk-informed investment and financing so that landlocked developing countries can better respond to their longer-term planning needs. We are with you with Courtney. We are with you with the whole UN system, and I wish you a very successful event for the rest of the day today.
Thank you for those words and perspectives, Mami. We will now turn, well, let me just say, we're very grateful to the government of Mongolia, who plays host to the International Think Tank for Landlocked Developing Countries. And we will now hear from the Director of Operations and Research Coordinator of that International Think Tank for LLDCs, who is Mr. Dulgun Damdin Odd. Mr. Damdin Odd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellency Courtney Ratway, and the Secretary General and High Representative for Landlocked Developing Countries, and Your Excellency, Mr. Liu Jianmin, Undersecretary General, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, His Excellency, Mr. Muzaffar Husseinzoda, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan, Excellencies and distinguished participants, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation for the invitation to this side event, and I'm delighted to virtually join you as a think tank and advocate for the landlocked developing countries. Let me acknowledge also the leadership of this UN-OHRLLS and its strong commitment to sustainable development of the landlocked developing countries. So today I'm going to present the case of Mongolia in terms of climate change and adaptation in landlocked developing countries. Excuse me. So the main contributing sectors to most landlocked developing countries' economy are mining and agriculture. And one of the priorities of the Vienna Program of Action is the structural transformations and economic diversification. And number of agricultural products and service sectors, financial products can be there. And LLDCs are dependent on the experts and have a large share of the population involved in agriculture and food production, processing, transportation, and distribution, making them especially vulnerable to the natural disasters and the pandemic. These facts and challenges include the remoteness and the limited access to international markets, long distances from the seaports and transit problems, reliance on transit neighboring countries for international trade, difficulties in hard and soft infrastructure, high trade and transaction costs, lack of productive capacities, high independence on international trade, and in particular on commodities such oil, minerals, vulnerability to climate change, desertification, and land degradation, amongst many. LLDCs have higher levels of food insecurity exacerbated by climate change, desertification, land degradation, and drought. The majority of their agricultural land being located in arid and semi-arid areas, with an estimated 54% of their land classified as dry land. Climate change affects all, and all the countries in the world have been impacted by the global effects of rise of global temperatures, increase of intense precipitation events, more droughts and heat waves, stronger hurricanes, rise of sea level, and meeting of ice caps. So around 54% of the 32 landlocked developing countries' land is classified as a dry land, as you see, and the economic impact due to the lost agricultural production caused by drought, extreme heat, and flood. LLDCs are lack of resources and GDP, healthcare system, technology to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And most of landlocked developing countries are experiencing poor governance, effectively allocating resources, developing monitoring and emergency programs, and high level of inequality in terms of income, education, and dependence on ecosystem. So regarding the Mongolian case, as a landlocked developing country in Asia, Mongolia has a very low population density with a population of 3.3 million people, and the contribution of agricultural sector to the Mongolian economy is 12%. and agriculture, and particularly the livestock herding, is an important source of living. So Mongolia's geographical location, extreme weather, and fragile ecosystems, coupled with prominent pastoral livestock and rain-fed agriculture sectors, make Mongolia's economy and their livelihood and traditional cultures highly vulnerable to climate change risks. So climate change trends in Mongolia is the annual average temperature has increased 3 times faster since 1940 than the global average, and slight decline in annual rainfall has been observed, which is most pronounced in the central region in Mongolia. And drought conditions have increased, as have the number of consecutive drought years since 2000. And consecutive wet days and the days with heavy rainfall have declined over the period of 1971 to 2015. The intensity of the zud, the severe winter, has increased. The number of days of dust storms has increased significantly also, from 18 days to 57 days over the period from 1960 to 2007. Mongolia has already experienced significant climate changes with temperatures increase and declines in rainfalls, and recent climate changes have led to chronic drought and increased exposure to secondary impacts such as dust storms. Mongolia faces rates of warming far higher than the global average. On the highest future emissions, pathway average warming could exceed 5 Celsius by the end of the century. Warming in maximum and the minimum daily temperatures is expected to be faster than the average rate, potentially amplifying the stress exerted on human health, livelihoods, and ecosystems. The intensity of extreme climate-driven hazards, including heat wave, drought, and river flood, is expected to increase. Mongolia's unique ecosystem are likely to come under pressure from long-term warming and drying processes, with shifts in species ranges and potential loss of forest cover and associated species. Changes in climate conditions are projected to place further downward pressure on the yields of current agricultural crops, particularly wheat, threatening Mongolia's food security. And without concerted disaster risk reduction efforts and support to communities to adapt, Mongolia's poorest communities face significant damage and loss. Focus is needed on the interplay between climate changes and current development trends in Mongolia. Unplanned development in flood-exposed areas and air pollution issues could interact with the climate changes to enhance health risks and inequalities. So here I'm showing you some natural disasters occurred in Mongolia year over the year, and the floods, dry weathers, dust storms, and the severe harsh winter, which impacts to herders a lot, and the economic impact is very huge. So the climate change adaptation policies and strategies in Mongolia is the National Action Program on Climate Change, adopted in 2011, which policy is focused on national capacity building for adaptation with an important role for public awareness and participation, which are emphasized as important barriers and gaps in the climate change work of the national society. The second is government policy on disaster protection, an important basis of the ongoing forecasting efforts for disaster risk reduction in Mongolia, as this policy document explicitly emphasizes the importance of technology and early warning to prevent disaster impacts. Green Development Policy, adopted in 2014, aims to ensure environmentally friendly economic growth and is therefore an important document for work on climate adaptation.
Mr. Damdin Odd,
Mongol-
hello. We're starting to run over time, so if you could just bring your remarks to a close, we'd appreciate
Yes.
it.
Thank you. This is my last slide. So a national determined contribution aims to create forest ecosystems well adapted to climate change and enhance carbon sink by implementing sustainable forest management. And the presidential decree issued in this October aims to develop a comprehensive national program to combat climate change and desertification, with actions to create a legal environment in which at least 1% of Mongolia GDP to be spent annually on combating climate change and desertification, and on increasing environmentally friendly and green facilities through public and local investments, and to organize a national campaign to plant more than 1 billion trees and ensure the implementation of it for 10 years. So lastly, the national strategy and action plan for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So taking this opportunity, I just want to take a moment to highlight the importance of the International Think Tank for Landlocked Developing Countries as the only intergovernmental organization of the group of LLDCs at the United Nations, and call on all participants to utilize the ITTLLDC efficiently as a platform for knowledge sharing, deepening collaboration, generating knowledge, and developing the analytical tools to overcome our common challenges. So in conclusion, I would like to reemphasize our full commitment to the cause of LLDCs, and we look forward to your recommendation and guidance for a coherent approach in the implementation of the ITTLLDC's agenda, especially with regard to the 2030 agenda and the Vienna Program of Action. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Mr. Damdin Odd, and indeed thank all the presenters that we've heard from today, and you, the participants as well, the audience, for engaging in this side event with us. As we have heard, there are successful solutions, I think, and best practices out there, such as climate-smart agriculture, sustainable water conservation, renewable energy solutions, and climate-resilient infrastructure. But it's also clear that more needs to be done to support the LLDCs in dealing with the impact of climate change. There needs to be, as we've heard, increased financial and technical support towards building institutional and human capacity for development and for implementation of NDCs and NAPs. We need increased technology transfer as well towards mitigation and adaptation, and increased finance, climate finance for LLDCs, and capacity building towards accessing that climate finance. I think the role of development partners, the role of the private sector and other international organizations are critical, especially in relation to getting out of the COVID-19 situation, while at the same time prioritizing climate action. So I would like to assure you of the UN's full commitment to supporting these countries. And with those very few words of conclusion, I'd like to thank you, the audience, again for your engaged and active participation. This event is now adjourned. Thank you so much.